Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I am your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I am on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship is conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. I'm joined today with a wonderful person and a great individual. His name's Eric Dinger, and he is the founder of the Powderhook app that can be found both on iOS and Android phones. And we're going to talk to Eric about why he created it, what was his purpose, and all of it in regards to hunter recruitment and mentorship. So, Eric, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Johnny, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. You have been somebody who I've really wanted to get on this podcast, and I've wanted to interview for a long time to hear what your journey and mission was that would lead you to creating Powderhook.
Sure. Well, I grew up in South Dakota, long ways from you. And the sign near where I grew up said pheasant capital of the world. And so I grew up loving the outdoors and caring about pheasant hunting, mostly. Dad ran the grain elevator in Redfield, South Dakota, and I had a bunch of family in the region. And so picture me as, your average little South Dakotan tooling around in Grandpa's tree belt with a BB gun, happy as can be to be outside and away from my parents and doing whatever I wanted to do. And that love of the outdoors just grew. And we ended up moving to Minnesota to go when I was in high school. And for the first time in my life, I was struck with how big of a pain in the butt it was to hunt if you didn't know the people around you. And then I moved down to Nebraska for college, and the problem just got worse. And so really what Powderhook is it's an answer to my own personal problems in some ways, in that, when you're new or when you're new to an area, you're new to a discipline or a species that you might be interested in hunting, it's really hard. It's a straight pain in the butt. And so we created Powderhook with the idea in mind that most things we do aren't that hard and don't take that much struggle. And so we want to just make it easier for people to get outside and enjoy this incredible way of life and these wild animals and wild places that I know I have so much passion for, and sounds like you do too.
Oh man, that is so cool to hear. So it's very funny that what came from a personal issue led to something that is impacting lives all over the nation. And that is what I'm trying to do with Washington Backcountry and the Soulful Hunter podcast. Is as an adult onset hunter, when I started getting into hunting and realized I had zero mentorship around me and had no idea of where to go and what to do and how to do it, I was like, man, I got to do something about this. And so instead of being raised by people who hunted and having it passed down generation to generation, I created my own community. And a part of what I've done is surrounding myself with people that are like-minded and have passion about it and also want to see hunting endure for generations to come.
You got it. Makes total sense to me. And what's cool about it is, Johnny, I'm planning a trip out your direction. And although I've been an outdoorsman and hunted and fished my whole life, I'm the mentee today. I'm asking you for recommendations as I come out your way. And I think that's super cool that, no one's ever mastered hunting. No one's ever going to know it all about all of it in all of the places. And so we vacillate between some days we are the mentor and some days we are the mentee. And that's a neat way to build a community, I think.
Oh, it's great. One of the things that I've found in life is that when you master something, if you're not taking the time to then reteach it to other people, it gets very boring. Mm-hmm. Whether it's any aspect, it's your job or hobbies or whatever, is that if you're not continuing to work on your craft, things begin to die and you lose your passion for it.
Totally agree. And hunting's no different. I think it's almost an evolutionary thing in us as humans is we want others to grow, and we want people to be better for having known us. And mentoring is much the same way, where, like you said, a lot of people have a lot of experience in the outdoors, and outdoor mentoring is a chance for those people to share what they've learned and what they've mastered. And in doing so, we open ourselves up to new kinds of relationships and different ways of seeing the outdoors and different ways of seeing the world that are so enriching to the idea of what it means to be a hunter in the first place. So all good stuff comes from sharing your passion. I completely agree with you.
Well, I'm a big believer in life is all about giving, and you can never outgive good. And so whatever you can to share and love other people, because that's ultimately what we're called to, is love God and love others. And
pretty simple, isn't it?
It's really simple.
Really simple.
Just take the time and give, and life is a reflection. And so when you give to others, ultimately it's going to be given right back.
Yeah. And not to make this a show about faith necessarily, but my pastor at the end of every church service says, "Find your joy in serving others." And I think that goes to what you're saying about, the joy of mastery is sharing it. And if you can find happiness in service of others, you can be happy all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about on this podcast the ability to feed people. If you ever go and try to feed homeless or go to a homeless shelter, it is extremely rewarding personally to spend time helping others. Well, there's nothing beats teaching someone how to feed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of power in that.
That's right. I mean, that's honestly the reason I hunt. One of them, anyways. I hunt maybe first because it's fun, but second,
Absolutely.
Because I'm obsessed with wild meat, fish, game. I grew up hunting and fishing all the time, but back in the day, if you will, there wasn't the exposure that the internet has given us to different culinary ways of treating game meat. And man, it's been fun over the last few years as my passion for cooking has really taken off, to figure out cool things to do with game meat. And man, I can tell you, like, it's such a neat way to introduce new people. You called yourself an adult onset hunter. It almost sounds like some sort of STD or something, but
right. But I'll tell you, it's contagious.
Yeah, it really is. That's right. And I think food is the contagion. I think, if you feed somebody a elk meatball from an elk you shot, you are contagious as it relates to hunting. I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's all about being an ambassador for what you love. I spent many years being a high school football coach, and I coached multiple sports in public education. And one of the things is you constantly have to recruit people to join your movement, whatever it is, to join to play a game, because numbers is what helps make you become more powerful and helps create a more fun environment for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Playing one-on-one basketball is not as fun as playing 5-on-5.
That's right. Totally agree.
And so with the hunting community, we got to get as many people involved as possible. Now, not everyone's going to be a hunter, but to have that skill set to rely on if you ever need to is something that's very beneficial to be able to pass down and leave that legacy with your children or with others.
Yeah, I mean, you're really echoing the stump I stand on every day is just, if you're listening to this podcast, you are welcome in the hunting community, and 99.9% of people don't care if you have pink hair and a pierced nose, or if you're black or white or yellow or pink or gay or straight or lesbian or what. It does not matter. What matters is that you learn to do it right and that you make it fun for others in camp. And so,
absolutely,
if you're willing to do that, you can come hunting with me. I think that the outdoors and hunting is a great equalizer, and most hunters would welcome the chance to have you involved, as long as you're a good time to be around.
Yeah, don't be a jerk.
Yeah, pretty easy.
Be kind.
This is all very simple. We could make this podcast very short. So grow in love of God and neighbor, and don't be a dick.
Right?
The end.
Come on now. Like I said, life is all a reflection of yourself.
Yeah.
So, how are you viewing other people, and turn the mirror around and look at yourself.
That's right.
I love it. So take us through a little bit of your hunting journey and what it's done for you, where you found fulfillment, adventure, and ultimately passion in hunting.
Sure, love to. Um, Thanks for the invitation to talk about myself, by the way. Just what I needed. So, my life as a hunter, as I mentioned, started. I don't remember not being a hunter. I remember riding on my dad's shoulders as we walked for pheasants. I remember driving around scouting geese, with my dad having, you know, snow geese landing on my grandparents' fields as far back as I can remember it. I remember Grandpa letting me drive his pickup around on the gravel roads in rural South Dakota with a 22 by my side, shooting things, maybe from the windows. I don't remember exactly. Uh, I might remember, but I might not report. Uh,
Yeah, the memory is a little fuzzy
yeah,
on
a
that
little
one.
fuzzy. Bad reception. And so, as far as how I came into this community, it's very different for me in that it's literally been a part of who I am all along. um, I would say that I've found new richness in it along the way by getting into different things. So becoming a bow hunter as an adult, starting to travel to hunt. Almost all of the hunting I've ever done has been close to home until the last few years when I've begun to travel a little bit to go see different ways of doing it and to chase different animals. And that is like a whole set of new feelings and new things to explore. An example is my dad and I went on my first elk hunt ever, a couple years back on public land in western Colorado. And I was for all intents and purposes, I was a 12-year-old little kid again. I mean, it was every single thing about that trip was the first time I had done it, and that's just so much fun. And then here over the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, I've become really obsessed with the things that I'm good at, sharing them. Just like you said, in many ways, I grew up in the place most people go vacation to hunt pheasants is where I grew up. And so for me, whether I shoot the next pheasant or not is really not all that important. I love to go, but I really, really love to see people shoot their first birds, or to really see them get into it and see it become their passion. And so I would say that hunting for me has been a lifelong source of enjoyment. It's a source of time with my family that we don't get very often. It's a source of time with my friends away from day-to-day hassle that we won't take otherwise. And beyond that, it's food. I mean, it's just all the good stuff you can possibly put into something, is what hunting is for me. And so, I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but it's been now even recently a source of how I make a living is helping others feel what I feel. And so, in some ways it's gone to a still different level for me. And so I'm excited to be a part of this every day. And although we have a monster hill to climb, and you feel like Sisyphus every now and then pushing the rock up the hill and then getting run over by the rock.
And having to just roll right
Yeah,
back down.
yeah, and sometimes the rock runs you over on the way back down. It's worth it because I care about this, and I want your listener to feel like they can go do and feel what I feel when we're outdoors. And so that's what makes it fun and interesting for me still today. And
Yeah,
imagine it would be
one of
that
the
way.
things that I wanted to just get people to like grasp is that your life will be transformed through the primal adventure of what hunting is if you just give it the opportunity to.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people meditate, right? Like one of the things that I think we totally discount about hunting is unlike golf, unlike bowling league, unlike darts, unlike going to the bar. Hunting is a very rare chance in today's society to be away. And what you don't realize when you've not been giving yourself the time to be away is how pent up and caught up you are in your own head. And what happens when you hunt, especially if you get, to where you've got a couple days, is suddenly you hear the natural world around you. Suddenly the squirrel you drive by on the way to work every day becomes fascinating to watch. there's an entirety, there's an expanse of things happening around us every day that we're never still enough to pay attention to. And for me, the only time I get a chance to feel that way is when I'm hunting. And that stillness is a feeling I chase and I want others to feel, because it rewards me with a sense of centeredness and a sense of peace of mind that I struggle to find elsewhere, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just recording a podcast last night with a female who's from Louisiana, New Orleans, and she's actually a medium.
Oh, really?
Yes, and
Miss
because
Cleo?
I wanted to talk about this.
Is it Miss
Yeah, I
Cleo?
wanted to talk about the spiritual aspect of hunting.
It's not Miss Cleo,
And she
is
says
it?
No, it's not Miss Cleo. But the point is that there's no better way to disconnect from your everyday life and then truly connect with your creator. You know, in the Bible, not to make this a religious podcast, because it's not, but it is a spiritual podcast, is that in the Bible it says, be still and know that I'm God. And there's no greater thing than just being out and watching his creation. Life is not just about you.
Amen, man. I have a quick story about that, and it goes back to that Colorado trip. But I thought of that verse on the top of a mountain in Colorado, and yeah, I'd climbed the mountain, was just exhausted before sunlight. Got up to the top, and it was silent. Little breeze, but I could see for I don't know how far. Must have been 15 miles, and it was like this overwhelming still, where I was like, God's presence was absolutely palpable there. And I hate to beat this to death, but that's a feeling I can't find elsewhere.
Yeah, there's nothing like it in this world, and you're not going to get it anywhere else.
Yeah, some people, I'm sure people have their place and their thing. You know, some people say it's flying. Like I have some pilot buddies that flying does that for them, but that's the only place I found it. And if you're listening to this podcast,
I could totally get it.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering, you know, is this for me? Ask yourself, when's the last time you just had a couple hours to sit quietly and think?
Yeah, that's hard to do and hard to come by nowadays.
Yep.
You know, how many people have their cell phones attached at their hips, or even like an Apple Watch on their wrist that just constantly reminds them that technology is around us?
Yep. It's like a snare back to reality.
Right. I just recently got an Apple Watch, and I love to run, so I got that to track my running so I didn't have to carry a phone. But one of the worst things that it does is that it constantly reminds me to get moving. Mm-hmm. It's like the complete opposite. It's like, no, I want to actually take a moment to be still.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, the balance of advancements and technology versus trying to stay simple and present with how nature is and how quiet it can be.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah. So what do you think's missing in hunting?
Oh, you're a listener. I'm just obsessed with I'm obsessed with getting new people going. Like hunting is amazing. It's fun. It's all the things we've talked about. What we're missing is, you know, people that don't look like me and you. People that don't think like me and you. Like, have you ever sit around and everybody agrees with each other all the time? Like, that's a lot of what hunting is, you know? Oh, yeah, you know, we love guns and we are all, you know, right wing, and we're not. And I think hunting camp craves diversity. And so I guess my answer to your question would be different people. Hunting is perfect as is. We want hunting to reflect society.
Right.
Society
it's not
old men.
Right. It's not white old men. It's not the 6-foot white guy.
Yeah.
You know, it's we want everyone to enjoy it. Everyone to experience it.
I do.
Yeah, so do I. That's why I'm on a mission to change people's lives and open up their eyes and give them an opportunity to find passion and success.
All right, let's talk about that. Do you think the average hunter wants what we just talked about? Like heart of hearts, do you think people want that?
Okay, so that's a great question. Being a teacher, I talk to my students all the time about what it is that they want. I say, if you don't know what you want in life, you're never going to achieve anything, because how do you know what to aim for? And I think a majority of society and majority of hunters don't truly know what they want.
I think that's a good thought.
I think they get caught up in this eye of providing organic meat for their families, or the thought of, oh man, I'm going to go out into the wilderness, but ultimately they're not truly allowing themselves to be fully immersed in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your take on that?
I think that most hunters would prefer that there be less hunters.
Yeah.
And the reason is, for some of your listeners, it's a phenomenon called the tragedy of the commons. It's this sense that there are more hunters than there is opportunity. And so when I can get mine, I got to get mine. And if I have some opportunity, I should hoard it and keep it for myself because it's fleeting. And I think that's really the crux of the challenge facing hunting going forward is, can we change the mindset from scarcity to abundance? Can we stop making hunting about the hunter and get hunting to be about what it should be and always was about, which is community and experience and food? And
Amen.
it worries me. Honestly, I think that's the crux of the conversation that hunting is having with itself. That's kind of a weird way to say it, but I think, my question for your listener is, are you a hoarder of hunting, or is hunting something you're treating with abundance? And I think most people are hoarding it, and I hope that we can change that mindset.
Yeah, I think not just in hunting, but in life. I think people live with and live in scarcity throughout all aspects of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, I went to a leadership conference this year down in San Diego, and it really challenged me with my beliefs and how I speak and how I am and how I show up in the world. And one of the things is talking about is that I live with abundance. I get to create my environment. I get to create how I want to see this world and how I am in this world, how I show up. And so, do you show up with abundance, or do you show up with scarcity?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going out in the woods thinking there's only one deer here, I can only shoot one deer, and there's 20 people out here, rather than being like, this is abundant. This is something that we all get to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think part of what I would say to illustrate your point is, it's not just about the deer. It's not, success isn't a binary, did I fill my tag, did I shoot this animal or not? Success is being there. Success is having the people along that you're with. Success is being away. And I think when we talk about it in that way, instead of success being the animal, we reinforce the good stuff. And we take a little of the emphasis off of the sort of binary nature of the way we've described success over the last couple of generations.
Right. One of the things in regards to success is the story. Is being able to come away with a story.
Mm-hmm.
My first big game animal that I shot was a black bear into the Cascade Mountains here in the state of Washington. And even though I love that meat and I never tried bear before, and it was my first true harvest and taking that meat and eating it and feeding my family, ultimately that taste of that bear meat doesn't last in my mouth, but that story and who I shared it with and the experience, it lasts a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're going to be passing down. You're going to, like, sitting around a campfire trying to invoke an inspiration in others and telling them about this experience and hoping that they want to have an experience just like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good stuff. Eric, you are a wise man.
I've been through a lot.
Yeah. Well, what did you do before you got into Powderhook and took that on as a full-time career?
Well, all right, on the topic of going through a lot, I actually, when I graduated, or before I graduated from college, I started a business that ended up growing over the next 10 years or so. And so really all I've ever done is owned and run businesses. The reason I say I've been through a lot is when you're 22, 23 years old running a company and you've never actually worked in the kind of business that you have now begun to run. You've never done any real accounting. You've never done any real invoicing. Part of, I guess, who I am is I just figured that stuff out the hard way. Just making errors and trying and failing and trying and trying and trying. And so my background is really one of just figure it out entrepreneurship. And when I say I've been through a lot, I mean, I'll give you a dumb example that people laugh at me about. But like the first year I did my taxes, I rounded all of my business revenue and expenses to the nearest $100. I couldn't fathom why the U.S. government would care about cents or even dollars. So I thought $100 was a really reasonable level to round to. Well, that's just an example of how completely naive I was when I started the first business. And so that's a tough way to grow up, is kind of the master's degree of hard knocks, figuring out how to grow and run a company on the fly. And so yeah, my background is in branding and in marketing and tech, and that's what gave me the background to feel like I could do something in hunting related to technology that would help with this problem we're talking about today.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool. So, how old are you currently?
38.
And when did you start diving into the world of caring about hunting and trying to recruit people and mentor people?
Well, one of the weird things is it's always been part of the culture in my family, and I didn't ever give it any credit for that. And I think a lot of people don't. I think Powderhook has tried to make mentoring a thing, and most of the time, what that looks like is just inviting somebody. And in my family, my dad is the mentor for, in the sense that Powderhook thinks about it, for hundreds of people over the years. All of my friends that hunt have come along with us. Many of my brothers and younger brothers' friends that have learned to hunt, my dad has taught them. And so in our family, this idea of kind of sharing camp or inviting, people along has always been part of how we think about it. I cannot think of a time where somebody wanted to come hunting with my dad or myself where the answer is just always truck leaves at 8. If you're in there, you're going. And that's it. And it's never been any harder than that. And I think for most people, most hunters, it's pretty close to that. There's some differences, right? If you're going to go take, a week-long trip back into the backcountry and you're going to, go find an elk that you've been studying all year, that's a totally different thing. But, as I said, we grew up bird hunters. And so having new people along, having friends along was just always part of how we did it. And so it's weird to think about it that way now that part of my job is to inspire people to do that, because I think for some people that's just how they do it. And what I would like to do in that realm is I want to find the people who are already doing it, and I want to celebrate them. I want to hook them up with a discount on a new shotgun. I want to figure out who's doing this already, and I want to make them the next hunting celebrities and them the people that get the hookups from the companies and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The industry discount.
Yeah. I mean, the industry discount goes to people with big social media followings, but I promise you that my dad has taught at least as many people to hunt as some of the best of those people. That's the guy
Right.
worth celebrating. We call him the local legend. He, the guy just doing it because that's what he likes, just how he does it.
The unsung hero. The person that's just out there doing life the way they think it should be.
Yep.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is your take on mentorship and the unwritten rules of hunting. You ever talked about that before?
Yeah, a little bit. Andrew McKean, who you mentioned knowing in our chat before the show, he and I collaborated on a unwritten rules of hunting story we did a while back. So yeah, I think there are some of those that are worth talking about.
What are some of the things that really stood out to you in that conversation that you think the listeners need to be hearing?
Man, I'll start with this just because I think it's important. I think that people take themselves too seriously sometimes when it comes to this stuff. Um, Unwritten rules are often traditions, and I think a lot of times we accidentally trample on traditions and things like that. But I also think that the only unique thing about our traditions is that they're ours. So just because it's the way you've done it doesn't mean it's the way it's done. That's a different way to say it. It can be done a
Yeah.
different way. It can be thought of in a different way. Just because it's a tradition doesn't mean it's special to anybody but you. I have lots of traditions. I love many of the traditional hunts I go on, but the only thing that's special about them is they're mine. You don't care about my traditions, and so I'll start with that, just because those traditions can be intimidating. And so if you accidentally trample on somebody's tradition, just remember that we hunters assign probably a little bit more value to that than we should.
That's a really interesting perspective. Coming from the Midwest, where you're surrounded by a lot more private land, and that was one of your reasons why you started Powderhook, was to try to gain access to being in a new location. What do you think about the idea of public land being someone's specific spot and to not be able to share that with anyone else?
Oh man, that's a tough thing. So we'll go back to the scarcity comment, right? It's never more obvious that hunting land is scarce than when you're sitting in a tree stand and somebody else walks below it on public ground.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth right now, because that sucks. And I hate it when that happens. It happens to me. It happens to you. It happens to everybody. The elk hunt I was telling you about earlier, I'll just keep talking about that one because your listener knows at least a little about that trip. Several times during that week, some guy would just tootle on in his ATV right below where I was hunting. That's really frustrating, and there's really nothing I can say to make that not frustrating. The thing I think we forget a lot of times is how much we have in common with the people ruining our hunt. And so in many ways, I guess this is me saying, okay, I understand it's really annoying. Here's my talking out of the other side of my mouth is those are probably people that you should hunt with. It's probably worth screwing up this hunt, go down and shake their hand, his or her hand, and get to know them a little bit, because the fact that you're doing the same thing in the same remote place means you probably have a whole bunch in common and would really enjoy hunting together. And so I realize that for especially the kind of the Western solo hunter, that's just not going to happen. I get it. But for your average guy or gal out there, the next guy in the duck blind down the river or down the marsh, or the guy in the tree stand 200 yards away from you is probably more your friend than your foe, if you can get over being annoyed with them. So I would encourage you to go shake their hand and see if you can't come up with a strategy to work together instead of ticking each other off.
Yeah, treat it more like a East Side or a Midwest deer push.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to work together, right? But all I know is that if that guy walks under your stand and you're on public land, it's annoying. And annoying is
Right.
maybe a gentle way to say that. So if you don't want to be annoyed with them, you might just go shake their hand and see if you can work together.
One of the interesting things is when I hear you talk about this, it reminds me of when I was trying to do a lot of research of how to hunt. I came across a lot of different forums, and there was this one topic list that was pictures of people passing trail cams,
Hmm.
and then literally minutes later to half hour later, animals were passing by.
Yep.
So it doesn't mean a spot is ruined just because someone walks through or rides through or whatever. You're hunting that specific reason or area for a reason. Those animals aren't just going to like randomly disappear.
Hmm.
Yeah, they might push over to the next ridge or whatnot, but they call that place home just as much as you call that your hunting spot. So you don't have to give up on things so easily.
Yeah, I mean, a person walking underneath your stand or wherever you're sitting can definitely ruin it. But one thing is for sure is the animals have a better idea of where that person is than anything you're gonna know. And if the animals know that person has cleared the area, they're gonna start to use it again at some point, and it might be exactly where you're sitting.
Yeah, and you can capitalize on that.
That said,
So
not my favorite experience either. So
no, because once again, if you're trying to get out into the wild for the stillness of it, there's something that breaks that up.
yep.
Yeah. So what has been one of your biggest struggles when it comes to hunting?
Access. I mean, now living in Nebraska, away from my extended family, kind of the farmers in my life are all up north in South Dakota. Um, and like you said, living in the Midwest, where I think Nebraska is 96% private land, it is a beg, borrow, and steal process to get access unless you own ground, and so or own a lease. And in this part of the country, it's getting more expensive. So be thankful, Johnny, you live where you do, and that there's so much public land around. Because here, I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. Here, there is almost no public opportunity within a few hours of here. There are
Yeah.
public lands, but public opportunity, I would qualify as something quite different than that. So,
Well, I tell you, I got offered a job in San Antonio, Texas 4 years ago. And I flew down there with my wife, and we were looking at moving and taking it very seriously. And it was just at the starting point of my hunting career. And I was looking around and being like, wait a minute, I don't just have access to go hunt. This is a giant state. And they're like, well, yeah, no, unless you know people that are going to let you hunt their tracts of land, good luck.
yep.
And I was like, oh, well, shoot, man. I mean,
That's
those mountains
actually,
are pretty special of Washington, but that public land has a lot of power and a lot of draw to it.
yep. That's what you're describing in Texas is one of the reasons we started Powderhook is we feel like connecting with other hunters and like as an example, you moved to San Antonio, you use Powderhook to find people locally who are willing to take you hunting or are willing to meet you and introduce you to a group of hunters or invite you to the Ducks Unlimited banquet or whatever. That's how you're going to crack in a new area. The challenge is Powderhook needs to grow, and today we've got 160,000 people that use our technology. If that number is 16 million, it's a lot easier to move around and imagine a world in which you can hunt. But I think you're exactly right. Moving to a place like Texas or Nebraska packs access challenges that you don't necessarily have the same type of in Washington.
Yeah. Well, access challenges and also community challenges. So one of my things that I've done in growing as a hunter and realizing I didn't have anyone else to even go with me, and so all my hunting partners are people I've recruited or met through things that I've done. And so I started hosting my own social events.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up starting an Instagram account and started a website and started taking to that, and all of a sudden I have this community of people that I can call upon, and they are there to support me and I support them. And it is so much fun to have somebody to constantly check your knowledge and ideas with, and just to talk hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's what we're hoping to replicate. What you did is something beyond what most people will do, and what you are building is kind of what we're trying to replicate in Powderhook, just to give everybody a place to go do that together. So that if you happen to have to move to San Antonio, you don't have to do what you did there again.
Right, right. Well, maybe Washington Backcountry and the Soulful Hunter podcast needs to partner with Powderhook, and we'll go throw social events all over the nation.
There you
And
go.
we will recruit people and build community and just hold hands with people and support them.
All right, what's your favorite idea for a social event related to hunting?
All right. So what I started doing was I was hosting almost like pint nights.
Mm-hmm.
It was at a brewery or a brew pub, so all ages were welcome. And had people come. I had some giveaways to kind of incentivize them wanting to be there. But with that, just talking about making friends, building community, and joining in on common conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so advertising that is just power of word of mouth. But this is where the power of social media comes into play. I had 0 hunting partners. You take to Instagram, you post a picture of you taking a hike with a weapon, and they progress, and then all of a sudden people start following you. You direct message them, and you start spreading the word. And before you know it, I went from having 15 people at my first social event to almost 65 and partnering with the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in the state of Washington.
Awesome. Pretty cool. A
Yeah.
little initiative can go a long ways. So the problem is, and this isn't the problem, but a problem with that is most people can't or won't take the time to do that. And so if we're going to make hunting universally available or easy, we need people like you and me to do a lot of that. The people that are invested in this, and make it easy for others.
Yeah. Well, bridging the gap and tearing down barriers.
That's right. So pint night is the big idea. That's a proven model that if you can get people a beer in their hands, they'll talk to you about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. Not just a beer, but more often than not, and this kind of goes hand in hand with hunting, is gathering around food.
Yep.
That's what always brings people together. It's funny, like in the Midwest, I was talking to somebody and they're like, yeah, it doesn't matter if someone dies, someone's born, someone gets baptized, whatever, there's a giant feast.
Yep.
And that's what brings people together and builds community.
So our big bring people together idea was what we called Game Feast, which was about 15 guys and I all donated game meat, and we tried to invite people that had never tried it, kind of the foodie community, if you will, the farmers market types. And we fed about 200 people their first deer, first elk, first moose kind of deal. And that was super cool. Except for the fact that that one-time effort feels unsatiating. Like it needs follow-up. And so we're starting to figure out, the reason I asked you is I love the idea of doing events, but they have to daisy chain together in some way that keeps people feeling like they're engaged.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was interesting with my events is that because I was only advertising through social media, anyone that was there was connected to me through my social media accounts. And so even though people didn't know each other that were showing up to the event, they had something in common.
Yeah.
And and then that was one of the points of the event is like, get people's names, but also get their social media accounts. Start following each other and bridge the gap for yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be interesting to see where this goes. I think one of the things with providing people opportunity to eat wild game as their first opportunity of like the hunting community is that food can scare people a lot more, but really ultimately what people want is acceptance and love. And so if you can provide them a community of love and acceptance, then they're more willing to take those baby steps into joining that community rather than being like, oh man, have you ever tried oysters raw? No, that sounds disgusting. I'm never going to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the challenges that we face in the hunting community.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. For me, it just all comes down to the invite. It's abundance versus scarcity. Are you the type of person who wants hunting to be the way it was for you when you started? If so, then you must adopt some abundance. And if not, and hunting is scarce, I think you can look forward to game laws becoming really difficult on us because the funding for conservation will suffer.
Yeah. My big thing that I like to push is hashtag mentorship is conservation.
There you go.
We are going to work on conservation through legislation, through having people fall in love with hunting and want to protect it.
That's a great thought. Mentorship is conservation. Mentorship
is conservation. It's taken over.
Attaboy. I love it. I really like that. And I'm around this crap all day, every day, so I'm kind of critical of most things. So that's good. I wish it was like 5 less syllables so that people wouldn't have to type all of that, but I love the message of it.
I know. It's a horrible hashtag. That's why I'm starting to go hashtag Soulful Hunter.
Yep, there you go.
But no, that's the motto. That's the creed, is like mentorship is conservation, because ultimately people want to be accepted, people want to be loved, and they want to be a part of a community. Yep. They want to be a part of something greater than themselves.
I think hunting offers that. Just it takes a hunter to invite somebody. That's it.
Right. There's a lot of times that in my own personal life, before I've matured and grown as a person, that I would be extremely sad or let down that my phone wasn't ringing. And like you said, it's just that invite.
Yep.
Hey, come along. Come take a hike with me.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on and joining us and creating this wonderful conversation for everyone to take part in.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to add?
Well, it's part of my job to tell your listener to download the Powderhook app and check it out. I will tell you that we need you to be active. We need you to hang out and participate and be that mentor for somebody else. And so you can find it on powderhook.com or your App Store or Google Play. Check it out. Get involved, would you?
Absolutely. And I personally have my own digital mentorship camp. You can find me under Johnny Mac. So I'm on Powderhook. I've been on there for over a year, ever since I found it. And I look forward to contributing as much as possible.
Glad to have you. Thanks for having me on, Johnny.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Really appreciate it.
All right, man. Take care.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast, as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.